Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Book Club. And today we are in the van again. I'm sorry guys, it's been like a crazy few weeks because it has been 11/11 sale. I fell sick, went overseas for work trip, and today, as promised, I'm gonna do a very interesting book and also quite a difficult one. It's called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Honestly, this is one of the harder books that I have read so far in my library, and I think a lot of people don't like him, but I think he has a very interesting perspective that even though you don't like him, you should kind of like listen to him. And he has an ego lah, so, and he's quite insulting sometimes, but if you read it and you just take it with a kind of like a pinch of salt in terms of like his character, then I think you'll learn a lot. How did I find out about Taleb is through Naval Ravikant. So Naval Ravikant has this book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is not written by him, but one of the books that he actually recommends is by Nassim Taleb, and then I started reading. So I think now I've read about 4 Taleb books. My first one was Skin in the Game. I think that's the easiest read of all. The rest I think are just really more complex, and I think, but they are actually very common sense. So without a further ado, let me just jump straight into my book review of The Black Swan. So if you guys don't know what a black swan is, you should be ashamed of yourself. No, I'm just kidding. So basically, in the past, if I remember correctly, in the past, I think in the UK, they think all swans are white, right? So then that has been the assumption that if you talk about swan, it's like a white swan. But eventually, suddenly when they went into Australia and they saw like black swans, and then they realized that, oh, actually not all swans are white, but we didn't know because we never ever seen a swan that is black. So that kind of is the story, and what it signifies is there may be certain situations where are so unexpected you don't know what you don't know, right? Like for example, you will never know whether like today when you walk out of the house, suddenly a huge car will just bang into your front porch, right? That's something that you'll never know unless you don't have front porch like me lah. So that will never happen. But basically, it's events that are so remote that you will never ever expect it. How Taleb describes Black Swan is this. He explains it as a rare, high impact and unpredictable occurrence. So imagine like you have a library, but there's a concept, like he coins a concept of an anti-library, which means the books that you don't have in your library. Even though your library could be like super big, there are a lot of books that you don't have in your library that you don't know about. That is kind of like the concept that he was trying to put forth. I mean, the gist of this book is about how do we kind of be prepared for such situations, and how impactful these situations are, and how we can be prepared to counteract these situations. The next thing that Taleb talks about in this book is about how we as humans, right, we really like to have a story in our head, and that's called the narrative fallacy. We always keep thinking like, oh, we should have this, oh, we should have seen it coming, like the financial crisis, we should have seen it coming, oh, COVID, we should have seen it coming, or we always think like, oh, this happens for a reason because of this. But really, the truth of the matter is that it's almost impossible to predict most of these things, and we as rational human beings should be aware of ourselves, like our tendency to actually craft a story and have a hindsight bias, and also know that the next unexpected thing is going to happen. We will never be able to prepare for it, because by concept, if we can prepare for it, it ceases to be unexpected. if you know what I mean. So like for example, if you think like, oh, terrorist attack is unexpected, the next COVID is unexpected, but suddenly something else happened that you don't even know, that could be in the realm of possibilities happen, and that is the Black Swan. You know what I mean? So that segues very nicely to part 2 of the book, which is that we can't predict. We really just simply can't predict a lot of things. For example, if you're a dentist, it is more or less expected how much you earn, what kind of living you have and all. So that is kind of non-scalable. Scalable is kind of like being an artist or like being like a trader and all, where you, like for example as an artist, you probably don't earn much at the very start, and then maybe when you suddenly you became famous for no reason at all, and then you suddenly earn $1 million, like millions and millions of dollars, and then you move to Hollywood, and that's kind of like what he calls scalable. Why is this important practically? I'll get to at the end of this review. So if you understand the scalable and non-scalable, so for the predictable kind of situation, he coined the term Mediocristan. Basically, is things that don't really change, and where extreme outliers have very little impact. For example, the height of humans, like it doesn't really matter, right? How tall everyone is. Like you got on Yao Ming, then oh great, okay. There's not much of like implication there. In Extremistan which is the opposite of Mediocristan, is a situation where a super improbable event can actually cause a lot of difference in the world. For example, stock market crash, right? That is in Extremistan, right? In this part of the book, he talks about like, you know, how we really are so arrogant as people. We always think that we know why things are good and why things are bad. Like we would say like, oh, you know, I knew that Taylor Swift was gonna be famous because this, that, and she will earn so much money. I knew it was gonna happen. But this is like confirmation bias and hindsight bias and everything. You to be very honest, at that point in time, like you will never know whether you'll win the lottery or not tomorrow, right? And then goes to part 3, where Taleb actually talks more about what are the kind of like theoretical and practical implications of Black Swans and how do we go about it. So he brought in this really difficult concept, which is fractals. So there's this mathematician that he really admires called Benoit Mandelbrot, who came up with this idea called the Mandelbrot fractal. So what is a fractal, right? You think like it's a fraction and all, but no. So basically, Mandelbrot came up with a certain kind of shape that is supposed to explain a lot of things in the world mathematically. For example, you will never see something that is a perfect triangle, a perfect square, a perfect circle. Those are, you'll never ever see that. But what you'll see are fractals, meaning shapes that are a bit like, for example, a snowflake. A snowflake is kind of like a fractal, where you kind of like cannot expect what is gonna have. Like for example, if someone is drawing a snowflake, you can't expect how it's gonna look like. But at the end of the day, like at any point in time in the drawing, like an outline, you cannot really expect where it's going up, where it's going down, where it's going up. But at the end of the day, you look at it and you realize that, hey, actually there is some sort of pattern to it, right? So these things are fractals, and over here you can see this is the Mandelbrot fractal that actually Mandelbrot came up with, which I think this is the most interesting part of this book to me. The rest are kind of like very difficult common sense. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you look at the fractal, basically what it's trying to say, almost, not exactly, is like a rock on the floor is kind of like a mountain in the grand scheme of things. It's a tiny mountain, right? The fact that there is a rock on the floor kind of predicts the possibility of the existence of a mountain. You know what I mean? It doesn't just apply to things that are quantitative in nature. It can happen to, for example, like a small company is kind of like the shape is quite similar to a big company, and a big company is kind of similar to an entire country's government, right? And which is kind of similar to the global economy, which I think it's very interesting when you take economics, though Taleb hates economists, right? But taking like economics, taking science, taking social, in even anything in life, right? And kind of think of it in this fractal concept, really very interesting to me, where you can actually kind of like loosely predict things and the impact of things that can happen. The thing that Taleb actually bashes about is this thing called the Gaussian curve. If you guys know what a Gaussian curve, in other words, it's called the bell curve. So in any field in life, we always kind of use the Gaussian to predict things. Like for example, you can use a Gaussian to predict the heights of individuals. That's fine, because more or less is the Gaussian does predict. But in most cases in life, it does not follow a Gaussian. We always think like, okay, you know, the shapes of leaves should be mapped on a Gaussian curve, but it shouldn't. Like there should not be there are a lot of things. Most things in life cannot be measured by Gaussian. Like if you are a trader, for example, you cannot use the bell curve to kind of see the impact and everything of any particular trade. Hey, scrap that. For example, if there is some sort of prediction in your nature of your job, unless it really follows the Gaussian curve, you cannot use it in any manner whatsoever, and you should actually use a fractal instead. Because the fact of the matter is that there are what he calls power laws and heavy tails, right? The tails in a traditional Gaussian is actually much more than the amount of chances of these tails happening, and the impact, if you build in the impact, the amount of tails and the amount of possibility of these tails actually happening, and the impact that these tails cause in the whole scheme of things is much higher than a Gaussian curve kind of shows. So actually, I mean, we have a lot of experts kind of like predicting things and all, but what Taleb actually says is that, you know, these things are actually not reliable. We shouldn't rely on them, because if the Black Swan happens like COVID, and then you really never know the impact and everything, and you wouldn't do a lot of things. You would probably take more precaution, right? So how do we really deal with the idea of Black Swans, right? I mean, honestly speaking, it's like, if this is super impossible to predict, then why we predict at all? But what Taleb says is this idea of anti-fragility, and he is the one that actually coined this word anti-fragile. What it means is basically anti-fragile, not fragile, right? To be able to build like systems, to have kind of like thought process in ourselves, in life, in the decisions that we make, in the government, in the business decisions, in anything that we do, right? We should be anti-fragile, meaning we build them in a way that covers as much as possible downside risks of anything happening that we cannot predict, and the upside that could happen in a benefits Black Swan situation. For example, I think Taleb has this dumbbell rule in the way that he invests his money. He puts like a base amount in the middle of the risk portion, but at the tail ends where the super unexpected things happen, he puts like a lot, so that when these things happen, he is able to hedge, he is able to benefit and capitalize on these extreme situations, and be the one of the only few people to actually like skyrocket their earnings, right? And I think in the same way we can do it in our daily lives. I mean, as a Singaporean or as a normal working adult, one way that actually our society has seemed to move into a path is to have a normal job that is stable, and also have a side hustle that if in the event these things really take off, it can like increase our income rather than always being in Mediocristan and an unscalable job or profession. We kind of like hedge a small bet or even a large bet on that can actually fly high in our income, right? And we should actually start doing that in our daily lives, in other ways, in other places of our life. So I think this book is honestly the first book that you should read if you want to read Nassim Taleb. There's so much nuances that he goes through. I think this is the kind of book that you probably need to read 5 times to kind of like get the gist of it. And so how difficult this book is, I would say, if you guys can already predict, it's a complete mind right? It's so difficult compared to the other books that other writers write, right? The way he writes is like, I think even if you are in academia, you probably struggle to understand. So this is the kind of book that you will be very proud to say, like, if you actually can read it, you will like, yes, this is the book that I can read, and can you read it? If you read it, then you can talk to me kind of book. Okay, but unlike most academic articles, I would say the Change My Life meter is 5 out of 5 reincarnated. This really changed the way I think about things, the way I act, the way I even strategize about my life, my investments, and everything else as well. So just a quick TLDR, this book is really very important, not just in business literature, it's also in academia, in self-help, in areas of your life that you really need to make decisions. This book is extremely good. I think anyone who does have that cognitive capacity should actually try to read it. I think it really will change your mental model. The way that Taleb thinks is so different from how a normal person thinks, but it has so much common sense, right? If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any books that you want me to read, you can comment in the comment section down below. And I'll see you in the next video.